This is Democracy Watch. So, Mark, we've got some huge news in one of the states that'll be most important this year in 2024, and that is New York. So, we're going to get to why New York, this liberal bastion, is so important in a moment. But first, what happened in court?
So big victory for voters and for voting rights in New York. The Republican National Committee and everyone's favorite Congresswoman, Elise Stefanik, challenged the state's expanded mail-in voting law, tried to strike it down. They don't want people voting, and they don't want people voting by mail, and they failed. They failed. A state court judge dismissed their lawsuit. So the vote by mail law will proceed in New York. And this is a big, big game changing decision for voters and potentially for partisan balance in the Empire State.
Now, the New York Early Voter Mail Act, which is the law that this suit was based on, what impact do you think that a law allowing all registered voters to vote early by mail will have in a state as big as New York? Like before this year, New York voters could only vote by mail if they were going to be absent from the city or if the voter couldn't vote in person due to either an illness or a physical disability. So this is obviously a huge change.
Yeah, so we have a lot of experience with states that move from excuse absentee voting, which is what New York was, to no excuse mail-in voting, which is what New York now will be. And we know that when that happens, a few things take place. Number one, you see a surge in voting. You see more people voting because voting by mail is just more convenient. It avoids long lines. It lets people be more efficient with their time. A lot of people find the process of voting at home less intimidating than showing up in a place and voting at a local school or whatever. So we know that it's going to increase turnout, but we know that it particularly increases voter participation among minority voters and young voters. So disproportionately, not exclusively, but disproportionately, we see first-time voters, which tend to be young, and oftentimes minority voting populations take greater advantage of mail-in voting than do the general population. Now, part of that is because those are communities that are oftentimes underserved by in-person voting, right? When you see those long lines, they're oftentimes minority voters or young voters. So they're oftentimes underserved, and mail-in voting is a leveling that gives them equal access. So I think that this will make a big, big difference. And the fact that Republicans are fighting this rather than saying, you know what, let's celebrate democracy, let's try to compete for those votes, tells you everything you need to know with, by the way, Elise Stefanik being a lead plaintiff in that lawsuit that failed.
Yeah, well, they say a hit dog will holler, so there's a reason that they don't want this to move forward. Mark, I alluded to this in the beginning, but talk about why New York is so significant this year, because I know a lot of people watching might just be thinking like, you know, New York is this big blue liberal bastion. What impact could that state really have?
All right, this is why you need to watch these videos. It's why you need to watch this video, because New York is critical. New York is the single most important state for control of the U.S. House of Representatives. Okay, if you look at the narrow difference between Republicans and Democrats right now in the House of Representatives, it is explainable almost in its entirety by the results of the New York congressional elections in 2022. And we're going to have very, very important competitive House races again in 2024. There's probably going to be redistricting, or there will be a new redistricting map. And so these incremental voting law changes about who can vote and whose ballot count will be the difference, in my opinion. And you can mark this and come back to this video in November. I think New York and these incremental voting changes will be the difference between who controls the U.S. House of Representatives come next January.
And obviously a lot still to play out in terms of redistricting in New York. And we'll talk about that in a moment. But also to stay on top of everything that happens in New York, if you're not yet signed up for Democracy Docket, please sign up. It's the free news outlet Mark founded to focus on everything voting in elections. I'll put the link right here on the screen and also in the post description of this video. It's also the best way to support the work, the invaluable work that Mark and his team do. So again, totally free. If you're not yet signed up, please follow the link and sign up. Mark, how can the RNC, the Republican National Committee, and other Republican organizations claim that they're now in support of voting by mail while simultaneously leading lawsuits to try and make it harder to vote by mail?
Oh, and they're doing it all over the place. I mean, they're doing it all over the place. It's not just New York. I mean, they just the Republican legislature in Arizona just filed a lawsuit to try to block that state's election procedure manual and provisions of it, some of which deal with vote by mail. All around the country, we see Republicans. We talked a few weeks ago about North Carolina. Republicans are in North Carolina trying to make voting by mail harder. They are desperate to keep voter participation down. They are desperate to keep voter participation down, particularly among young voters and minorities. And this is how they think they're going to do it. So they can speak all they want to the New York Times and the mainstream media about, look, we have these plans to do vote by mail. Nonsense. The Republican National Committee is spending real dollars, donor money, to try to limit vote by mail.
Well, whatever money they have left, aside from Donald Trump's legal fees.
Apparently, they don't have that much.
Not much money. Actually, this is the least amount of money that the RNC has reported in almost 10 years. At this point in 2020, the RNC had $61 million cash on hand. This year, they reported, I think, $8 or $9 million. But, so it goes, I guess, when Donald Trump is the face of your party. Mark, what is the status now of New York's redistricting process that I alluded to before? And will we see new maps, of course, in place in time for this upcoming election?
So we're going to see new maps in place in time for 2024. That is a done deal that you can take that to the bank. The question of the timing, every day, when you send me that good morning, Mark, email, I know what you really want to know is, do we have the maps in New York yet?
Yeah.
We're going to have the new maps in New York from the Independent Redistricting Commission any day now. It'll be sometime this month in February. I know you and I will jump on to onto YouTube, onto this video and do one as soon as they're out, but it's going to be in time for 2024. We're going to have them this month. And believe me, if you all out there think you're waiting, you should see what a nudge Brian.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we've spoken about this before, but look at the margin in the House. That is owed, to your earlier point, entirely just to even that one state's map. So once those maps are made into fair maps, then that effectively eliminates the entire Republican majority. That means that if fair maps were in place right now, at least in just the state of New York, which is notwithstanding fair maps that have already been changed in Louisiana, Alabama, the pending ones in Florida, South Carolina, ongoing
Georgia.
lawsuits in Texas, that would mean already right this moment that we would have Hakeem Jeffries as the Speaker of the House instead of Mike Johnson and all of the dysfunction that comes with him.
Yeah, that's why I said, New York, really, anyone who's not paying attention to New York is not paying attention to democracy and the future of control of Congress, because right now, experts believe, people who follow New York closely, I do, but I think it's a bipartisan consensus, that a fair map in that state flips 4 to 6 seats.
Yeah.
Now, on any given day, some Republican is retiring to go become a Fox News analyst. So I don't know exactly what the margin is between the two parties, but it's between 4 and 6 seats. I mean, that is the difference between Speaker Jeffries and the guy Johnson from Louisiana.
Speaker Jeffries and abject Christo-fascism. So we've got early vote by mail in New York now. What's next on the horizon for New York? Because in fairness, that state hasn't exactly been a voting rights utopia, despite the fact that Democrats do have full control.
Yeah, no, I've been a critic of New York's. Like I am, I'm born in New York. I was raised in New York. I follow New York politics carefully. But frankly, New York voting has not been what it needs to be. It has not been a leader as a state on these things. It is good to see they've done this with vote by mail. But think about, Brian, how much further behind they are than, for example, where you are in California. I mean, California, you guys are light years beyond this. So New York's got a lot of catching up to do. My team's going to trial in a few weeks against New York over their ban on providing food and water to people waiting in line.
Yeah.
Why the heck does New York have a ban on food and water, people waiting in line? That's the kind of stuff that we see in Georgia and Florida. We sued them in one, and we're going to win in New York. But so there's a lot more that New York Democrats could do to make voting more easier and more accessible to people.
Well, we appreciate the work that you're doing, even in these blue states like New York. For those watching, again, if you want to support Mark and his team for the invaluable work that they're doing right now, all you have to do is sign up for Democracy Docket. It's completely free, and it's a big help in terms of getting his word out and the word of his team out. With that said, I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
And I'm Marc
This
Elias.
is Democracy Watch.